Welcome everyone. My name is Eric Lidman. I'm the CEO of AimPlan.
Someone's saying hello from Latvia as we wait. Feel free to let us know where you're coming in the chat.
Correct. We have the chat open and we have the Q&A session open and everything. So that's great. So you can write that in the right where you're coming from in the chat. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening. And I think even there is a lot of people joining from India and they are probably in the middle of the night. Thank you for joining this AimPlan webinar. We are really thrilled to have nearly 500 participants from 60 countries signing up. So we have seen a great interest in today's topic, which is putting the A in FP&A, Advanced Analytics for Finance Professionals. I would also like to welcome Paul Barnhurst, sitting in Utah, and Michael Parrott, located in Iowa, to this webinar, who will be the main speakers today. We'd like this webinar to be very interactive, so we'll conduct a few polls during the webinar, and you can use the Q&A to ask questions, where you can also upvote other questions, and we will have the public chat open, where you can leave comments. But before diving into today's topic, a short introduction of who we are. Let's see. I will share some slide here just to get going. As I said, I'm Eric Lidman. I'm the CEO and also one of the founders of AimPlan, a SaaS software company with headquarters based here in Sweden, actually in the northern part of Sweden. We were talking about before we started the webinar, how much sun we have now in December, and it's maybe 2-3 hours sun every day, so it's really dark and cold. I have been working in the FP&A and business intelligence space with controllers and CFOs for the last 25 years in different roles. Started as a management consultant and then worked in product management, CTO, and had a few more roles. With AimPlan, we are on a journey to supercharge the Microsoft Power BI data analytics platform by adding budgeting, forecasting, financial reporting, commenting, approval processes, and a lot more. Our customers, they are primarily based in Europe and North America, and they are organizations that have invested in Power BI as their primary data analytics platform, but they have then grown out of relying on manual spreadsheets for their financial processes. We are a Microsoft ISV partner, and they're also collaborating with a lot of professional consulting partners around the world. We implement AimPlan with Power BI, and one of these partners in the US is 480 Consulting, led by Michael Parrott and his team. So with that, Michael, over to you. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm the CEO and founder of 480 Consulting. I was been in Chicago for the longest time and recently have moved here to Iowa City, Iowa. For those wondering, 480th it's the namesake. It's where my family farm's located in Iowa. It's on 480th Street. My family's kind of full of engineers. And so I just wanted to have an homage to them. So that's where it comes from and where I am. By background, I myself am a mechanical engineer, but my corporate career started in FP&A at Anheuser-Busch InBev, or as part of their global team. So definitely used to a lot of these calls with full global audiences when I was there. I'd say for the most of my career, I've been a consultant, though, in working in management consulting. I was at McKinsey & Company, but the clients I serve have always been FP&A teams or say planning teams that are embedded in other functions, sales planning, operations planning, and those sorts of folks. And here at 480th, we help clients with strategy, implementation, and support around planning, forecasting, and budgeting tools. So like Eric mentioned, we're an AimPlan Elite partner, and we worked with them since the early days of AimPlan, and excited to talk with everybody today about analytics in FP&A. I'll pass it to Paul now, who's going to give us kind of an overview of the topics we're going to go through today.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Eric. I'm thrilled to be here with AimPlan and 480th Consulting. We're going to start by asking a poll question that we're going to put up. We'd love to know kind of your current status on using a BI tool. So you should see here in just a minute a poll come up. You'll have about a minute to answer that. So go ahead when that comes up and answer it. Before I get into the agenda, just want to thank everyone for being here. We got people from all over the world. I was looking at the list. Islamabad, Mexico, India, Atlanta, Sri Lanka, Canada, Utah, all over the place. So, quite a diverse group, which is great to see. We appreciate that. What we're going to be talking about, as many as you know, is kind of putting that A in FP&A, as we like to say it. I still remember I did an interview with a CFO by the name of CJ Gustafson. And he said many times in FP&A, you have called it a fat P, right? We do the planning really well. We spend a ton of time on planning, but you have this really skinny A and you don't get into the analytics. But that analytics is critical, especially today. So we're going to talk quite a bit about that. And where we're going to start is with what does it mean to put that A in FP&A? So Michael, I'd love to get your thoughts. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, definitely. So, I'm just thinking from the different career paths people find themselves in. Some start in accounting, some start in FP&A. But these days, there's another field that you can go into to just start in analytics and then find your way into finance later on. And I've always been drawn, maybe it's being an engineer by background, in the finance function. You find a lot of people that get drawn into analytics. And usually if you're walking around a corporate office and you say, who's your number one go-to on, an analytics thing, the odds that that person sitting in finance are really high. And so I always just love talking about this topic with people that work in finance. They're always passionate, curious, and just always discovering kind of the latest and greatest. So for me, that's kind of what it represents. And I guess what it really means these days is more and more often, you might have someone down the hall in your office or someone online, if you're virtual, who actually is like a full-time data scientist, data engineer, or BI engineer, and getting their skills into your toolkit as an FP&A analyst is, I think, a really exciting thing that's going on these days.
I agree with you. You're seeing a convergence. Sometimes you hear the term citizen scientist. Sometimes you have a data scientist in the team. But with AI and all these changes, there's definitely more and more convergence between analytics, data science, FP&A, and they can all help each other, right? It shouldn't just be a silo. But let's take a look at the results from the poll here real quick. Everybody should be seeing the results. So what we had is first place, Power BI, 46%, 20% Tableau. We had 10 people or 16% not using a tool, followed closely by other at 15, and then 3 said click. I'd love to get your thoughts, Michael or Eric, either one of you. Anything surprise you in those numbers, or is that probably about what you expected?
I think it's probably what I expected. I think, Power BI is the leading data analytics platform in the world, and it's a lot of companies running different Microsoft products. And we know that Tableau has been strong in US for a long time, a little bit weaker here in Europe. So pretty much expected, I think. And it's interesting to see that they are using these kind of tools inside the finance organization also.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's kind of similar to what I would have expected. Maybe other was a tad higher. Click might have been up a little bit, but it's about where I would expect. All right. So, we've talked about the analytics. I love what Michael shared, how it all converts. What we want to get into is a little bit more of advanced analytics. The reality, and I was on a podcast event the other week, and one of the CFOs said, look, the day of just being able to manage data is gone. Finance has to help the business make better, faster decisions. And one of the key ways to do that is really advancing your FP&A process, getting into analytics more. And sometimes you'll hear terms like data engineering, model layering. I think that scares some people off. Like, what are you talking about? So as we move into more advanced analytics, I'd love, Michael, just starting with, what does data engineering mean at a simple level? Because sometimes people hear that and probably get a little bit scared.
Yeah, it's definitely it's an intimidating title for sure. I can understand that. For me, to simplify it for me, I just think of it as it's really the extracting, transformation, and loading of data, or ETL is what it gets called. And it's really getting data from all those different source systems you have, getting them into some sort of cloud source, whether that's just getting them into a SharePoint or getting them into an actual warehouse or a SQL database. And doing that it sounds simple when I maybe put it that way, but like making it resilient, making it so that errors and bugs don't pop up, doing it at a high frequency is where a lot of the tricks come in. And I think from the FP&A angle, one of the tools we like to use for it, I see a lot of Power Query being used these days. That's even getting more and more built into Fabric. If you're getting more advanced, there's things like Azure Data Factory. We can go in and build pipelines. something that's really, on the other end of the spectrum, something like Nime or Alteryx that's more like point and click and graphical is used a lot. And that's, I'd say, maybe similar to a Tableau prep. But at the end of the day, I think users come first. And so what is all of this about? It's just giving people the data they need in the format they need it in, as in an automated way, is really the goal of anything around data engineering.
Well, I think I spent enough time in Power Query and SQL, but I might be a data engineering pro at this point. As I've heard it said, how would you describe FP&A? And I think people appreciate this one. You spend 80% of your time cleaning data and 20% complaining about the data you clean. So, sometimes it definitely feels that way. Do you ever have those days, Michael?
Definitely. Yeah. Anytime I'm like if I'm building out my work plan on project or something, I'm like always making sure we got to add that extra weekend for data cleaning. We know it's coming. We don't know what's coming, but we know we're going to have some surprises once we can dig into things.
I'm sure as you work with companies, you build that into the timeline. Oh, we think we can implement it in 7 weeks. And there's a week or two in there for cleaning, transforming, doing something with the data, because almost always you're going to find a surprise, I would imagine. So, how do you really make data more accessible and understandable for the end users, for analysts? I think, right, there's more than enough data. The volume of data isn't the problem. But, with data engineering, how do you make it accessible? We'll start there to people.
Yeah. So in my mind, as the scale goes up and as you're maybe sharing data sources with each other, formalizing, adding a pinch of governance that goes, a long ways, and getting a little bit more structured around things. So, what are some simple things you can go about doing this? It's getting data into some sort of cloud format or feed so that everyone can pull from one source, getting out of email, getting out of sending files. It's using clean naming conventions this sounds really simple, but clean, simple conventions that are useful, kind of standardizing those and communicating those. Plain language goes a heck of a long ways as you're building out your, data names, and having some sort of data repository, even just like a standard place you go to. A lot of companies are building entire a data platform that you go to get your sources, and then you can put your documentation and things like that. So, I think Amazon is famous for talking about how any products they're working on, you break it down into little pieces, you make sure little pieces that you have are interoperable. And so making a data source something someone can go to, read it, understand it, even without context on their own, is kind of an ultimate goal for me, in a company environment.
Yeah, it's amazing when you can go and look at reports and get value out of them without having to read for 20 minutes or ask a bunch of questions and so on and so forth. Like, it really gets to that understandable part. We talked about the data engineering. It helps with the accessible, extracting it, transforming it, then you got to put it somewhere. But I'm curious, so I'm sure we have many people who are probably early on their journey, about 20% said they're not using a tool today. Where should people get started, up and coming analysts? How should they, how much time should they invest in data engineering and model design? Because I know some think like, well, I'm a finance person. Why do I need to understand data? What would be your thoughts there, Michael?
There's a selfish motivation here. Who hasn't automated some cool part of their job some way and been so proud of look at the time you can save? I mean, I remember I was working for a large distribution company, and I had to present the steer code deck every 2 weeks of how our budgeting program was advancing. And I automated the whole thing where I could click a button and it downloaded the data, ran my analytics, pre-built the PowerPoints. And I just loved it because I'd sit there with my copy, click a button, and I'd be 80% of the way through a steer code deck. So I think just think of how you can actually make your life easier as you're doing it. And then it becomes fun as you're doing it, because you kind of have to be curious to learn some of these things. It's technical. It can be a bit of a grind. So make sure that it's fun. And to be honest with you, just on a tactical basis, ChatGPT goes a long ways these days. And a way that I use it is you just simply take screenshots of the code or take screenshots of the data model that's in Power BI, and it can actually work with that really, really well. Or take your code that you've written and you need to document it, have ChatGPT clean it up and document it for you. It can do that really, really well, actually. So there's some really easy wins you can get to that help make learning a little more fun as you go along.
It's a great idea. I haven't thought about it for documenting code. I've used it to write some stuff. Excel formulas, a little bit of Python, whatever, different things. So that's a great idea there to help, because nobody likes documentation. Well, maybe Eric does, but the rest of us don't. Now, any thoughts on this subject, Eric, you'd like to add?
I think, if you come with a finance background, Excel is kind of the tool that you know by heart. And if you start there, you know the formulas and stuff. I think that the next step for many people is kind of learning how to do pivot tables. And then you start to work with analytics in its most basic forms, I would say. The next step is to say, okay, we want to get this data from some data source. Then you go down into Power Query in Excel, and you start to understand that you might work with not one table, but 2 tables and 3 tables. You maybe need to build relationships between those tables. And that is really what is in nowadays called the semantic model, if you want to throw out some nice new popular vocabulary about kind of the data modeling side of things. So that's kind of a good progress, I think, if you come from a finance perspective to go that. And then you come into databases and warehouses. And I also think that it's important to learn this language, because even if it's not you that's going to do all of this stuff, it's so important to be able to communicate both with the business people, but also with the IT department or the IT people that will actually build this stuff. So that, I think that's a great, all of these are great skills to learn about.
Couldn't agree more, having at a minimum that ability to have the conversations with the technical and the business. You don't have to understand it all, but you need to understand it well enough to understand what's going on, to have those conversations. For me in my career, it was invaluable. I spent a couple of years doing report writing before I moved into a traditional FP&A role, and so learned how data structure works, learned SQL, which helped a ton with transitioning to Power Query. And I'm a big believer, if you start to advance your analytics, almost all of us, the gateway is Excel. You start to learn tables, like you said, pivot tables, Power Query, and then many advance on to Power BI. Sometimes you start to pick up some Python, and so many tools become available to you. And for finance people, almost always you start with Excel. So, one of the things we want to achieve is really get to that point where we can integrate the analytics, both our operational financial data near real time, something that really allows us to have access, not after the fact, but as things are going on. So let's start with, I think there's often a misconception of the term real time. People think the data is always available to me every second. So let's start there with financial data and just kind of data in general that finance uses. What does real time mean to you, Michael?
I always that's the first question I always ask when it comes up in a discussion, because real time, to me, what it means is it's faster than what your need is, maybe by a factor of 2. That's what most people, I think, mean when they're speaking, but it could mean the definition of that can vary widely. It can mean daily updates. It could mean every 2-hour updates. And even more extreme than that, it could mean streaming data, where the moment something new comes up, it's pushed into the data sets that you're analyzing. So, but typically if we're talking real time, usually it's a days, within a day, hours, minutes is the domain that you're in. Usually I wouldn't call anything real time that's monthly refreshes, but the trick here is I find it's like a hockey curve in terms of how difficult it is to get to that real time. If you really want data that's streaming through instantaneously, the second there's a new entry, it's visible, that can be difficult to achieve. Although I think it's easier and easier as the days go on to get to real time, just because the tools available to us are getting better.
Yeah, and I'd love to know, feel free to throw it in the chat how many of you have, what you consider real-time data, or where you're at in your journey. Just, feel free to let us know. Feel free to put any questions in the Q&A as we chat, and we'll monitor those and either answer them at the end, or if it fits, we'll answer them as we go. But, next thing is, I think, obviously the goal here is really for finance to make better, faster decisions. Real-time financial data helps with that. How do you manage making that switch? Say you're in that organization where, data's been a mess. Data is hard to get. It's often slow. I'll get back to you next week, right? How many of us have said that or heard that when somebody asks a question in a meeting? I would guess pretty much all of us. So, how do we start in that process and manage that? What do you advise people as you're talking to companies and they're like, we really need to go on what I'll call a data transformation. I kind of like that term versus, we've been talking digital for the last 10 years, but often the start is that data transformation. How do people manage that? And what do you advise them on that journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I think the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of people is all the technology. But at the end of the day, if you're going through some sort of data transformation, it should be changing the way you work and the way you communicate, and the culture of your company should be the thing that's going to be impacted. And if you looked at like 10 projects that failed and you say, why did they fail? It's usually not the technology. It's usually the adoption of the technology, the interpretation of the technology, the expectations of the people. Those are reasons why projects fail. And so I think underestimating that is like one of the main watchouts I like to bring in. And then if we're talking real-time data, there's definitely like a psychology, I think, of seeing the latest, like who hasn't been asked for the latest from someone and always had to have that ready. And so I think there's just like some psychology that comes into play as data becomes more and more available to you. People want more and more of it. And, you know, an example I'd give there was I had a client that would do, you know, like weekly reporting, and they wanted to push to daily reporting. And you just get into some funky things that happen when you get into daily reporting, because not every week's the same. There's holidays and comparisons to last year where schedules are different. And, you know, maybe some source system upstream dumps a lot of data in on Monday, but on Friday there's a delay for some reason. So I think that you can get some strange things start to happen once you try to push your time scale shorter and shorter.
For sure. I still remember business I was working on, I had to try to forecast all our revenue, and they wanted it every week, and would pull the data. You see big, huge increases on Friday when certain batches came through. And you'd know as you're looking year over year, because we're trying to use some statistical to say, hey, how are we performing against forecast? And it was really, really tough when you're looking at daily all over the world and all different types. And so sometimes it's almost more effort than it's worth. You really have to know the business and ask yourself, am I going to make better decisions by seeing a data? Can I actually impact the level I'm looking at? And if the answer is no, you probably want to pull it back up, because it's going to be more work than the benefit. And I think that's the question, at least I think of, is what decisions will I make differently by having the data at this granularity or this speed or whatever it may be versus the level I had it at before. Yeah. And so we have a question in the chat I want to ask you real quick, Michael, and then we'll move on. This is one we all get. Eric's probably seen this one. He'll smile as I read it. How large should a company be before moving from Excel to more sophisticated analytical tools? We'll give both of you a chance on this one. This is a question we get a lot. Michael?
Well, number one is I'm sure actually there's stuff happening in Excel you're not even aware of because it's changing so quickly. So I think actually the frontier of Excel might be bigger than what you think. But that being said, once you start getting more advanced with Excel, it starts to look like Power BI. If you're actually building Power Query into Excel and building tables, you might be doing things that you'd be doing in Power BI anyways. And so it's possible that you could add that into the mix more quickly. But in general, I think part of it comes down to the audience size. Because if you're building reports that go to 1, 2, 3 people, it's perfectly fine to have individual reports. If you're, on the other hand, publishing things to 10, 20, 50 people, you're going to struggle in Excel relatively quickly. And then the other factor that I find determines whether Excel is a good solution or not is just what degree of collaboration do you need and how good are people at Excel Online? Because Excel Online is a beautiful thing. You can do great collaboration there, but you run into problems. Even then, you run into problems relatively quickly. So those are some of the kind of like watch outs I think of. I mean, if I'm trying to think of a dollar sign of when I start to see non-Excel things come in, I've seen $150 million revenue companies that still have things running on Excel that you couldn't believe. I saw orders for inventory being that entire S&OP process being run out of a Google Sheet where people were just color coding lines as a way to communicate to each other. I saw that recently. So even in companies that are hundreds of millions of dollars, you'll find processes that are running on. And by the way, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Maybe that's fine. But I think that the experience you have, you'll start to get some flags for, hey, now's the time for me to make a change. And you kind of, that's the intuition there grows over time.
Eric, any thoughts on this one?
I totally agree with kind of the size of the audience is important. I was thinking also while Michael was speaking that, that when we start to switch from spreadsheets into kind of a more formalized data model and calculations controlled in one central place, that is also when you decrease the risk of errors. If you really beta test your Power BI solutions, for example, you kind of get more of a steady, streamlined solution for publishing and analytic data out to a lot of end users on a regular basis. You should also remember that Power BI, when you have built something in Power BI, you can easily hook up a pivot table in Excel or everything that can connect to Power BI. Like from Excel, you can more or less browse the live Power BI model from Excel. So Excel is still a tool, even if you switch over to a solution like Power BI.
Yeah, I agree. Regardless of what your analytical stack is, I always like to say there is always a place for a spreadsheet in your tech stack, whether that be Google Sheets, whether that be Excel, equals, whatever. It doesn't matter. Spreadsheets have their place. When they start to break, when they start to become difficult, when you can't collaborate in them, what I often refer to as Excel hell, you know it's time to start to branch out and look at other options, because it's not an enterprise scalable solution for planning or for analytics like Power BI and others. So I'm going to ask one more question here, and then we're going to do a brief kind of demo to show a little bit of how this can enhance decision making. So I'd love to get an example from you, Michael, where you've seen implementing these deep analytics and more, closer to real time, improving those processes has enhanced decision making, really made a difference to a company you've worked with by having better analytics in place.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely. So the good example I'd give would be this is a consumer goods distributor. It's actually like, I think, auto industry, parts, things related to cars and trucks. And they actually found that they had a lot of opportunity to do a total gross margin optimization. So basically, like, their sales teams and their operation teams were operating in silos and not collaborating very well. The sales team was trying to, of course, drive sales and drive customer satisfaction, but then they're making decisions that really were expensive from the operations side, and vice versa. Operations team were, making things run smoother and more predictably, but then they were losing sales. So we actually built out some analytics that were automatically recommending the right level of sales attention that an account should be getting, and the right level of attention that from an operations standpoint that delivery frequency should be, and made both of those recommendations visible to both teams in a way they could collaborate and just get visibility to it, so that you didn't have these sales and ops silos working side by side. And I think the other one is anytime you can get your P&L modeling down and have it be visible at an account level, then you start making decisions across the P&L if you can break it down and allocate it in a way that's visible by all teams. So I think that's something else that distributor had done. So I think it's a good example of breaking down the silos, getting data into one place, and having different teams make collaborative decisions. I guess that example was during the whiplash of all the COVID effects too. So we had a lot of changes happening in the company quickly, and they just needed some way to make recommendations fast so that they could be resetting various service levels for different accounts.
As I hear that, and I think it's so true, one of the great things analytics does is it breaks down silos, so you can better coordinate. If you're all using the same data, you're able to look at it, you're seeing what each other are doing. And the other you mentioned is if you're able to show detailed levels of what people's budgets, what their forecasts are, whatever those numbers may be, where you can help hold them accountable and have those conversations, especially ahead of time. Like, hey, it looks like you're on pace to spend 3 times your T&E budget. What's going on? What is the revenue to that? And you can have real discussions that drive and meaningfully impact the business. So we're going to see an example of that here from Eric on sales forecasting. So he's going to share his screen here, and then we'll have a few questions we'll go through.
So let's see if we can share the screen. Do you see some beautiful, well, I don't know if they're beautiful, the charts we made here in the demo. This is normal Power BI. So for those who don't know Power BI, it's the Microsoft tool for data analytics. You have one version, which is the Power BI desktop version, which is free, that you can download, and you can run it like Excel on your local laptop. But when you're going to publish reports out to end users, for sure you're going to use something called Power BI Service, which is the web interface to that tool. Power BI connects to kind of 200 different types of data sources, so you can bring data into Power BI really easy using Power Query, the same technology that you use in Excel. Power BI is very famous, like Qlik and Tableau, for what's called cross-filtering, the possibility to analyze data. So in this case, we are looking at the sales report, actual sales. We see kind of the sales quantity of different products that we are selling this year, the sales we have had of different products. We can also see the same products, the prices, the average price, how that has developed over time. And what we can do really easy in normal Power BI is to say, okay, I want to look at the computer segment, maybe the direct sales channel, maybe the customer C-class customers. And then all of a sudden, this interactive dashboard, it just changes when we filter this data. And maybe go down to an individual customer, look at target to see kind of the sales we have there and the price development we have there. This is kind of what Power BI is famous for. For sure, you can try to, if you talk about financial reporting and real-time data in financial reports, you can bring data up into Power BI and build kind of very much like pivot tables in Excel. What not everyone knows is that Power BI is not really that great at building P&L statements and balance sheets and other financial reports. It's really tricky to do that in pivot tables in Excel, and it's the same thing in matrix reports in Power BI. So what we can do if we add aim plan to Power BI, just look at reporting first. It says we can use the data you have in Power BI, and we are still inside Power BI, but now we are adding the aim planning and reporting visual here in the middle. So you can see that it looks much more like a real P&L statement. We have some revenues. We have a specific structure here. We have personnel costs. We have a calculated line somewhere in the middle and a gross profit and so on. This is difficult to do in pivot table in Excel, and it's very difficult to do in normal Power BI reporting. We can drill down into details. We can add the aim plan commenting visual on the right side, but it's still dynamic. So if I select another cost center in Power BI, I will get data from 3 cost center instead of 2. We can drill down into the details, go into invoices, and we can also, for sure, export this report out to Excel if you would like to use it in Excel. And the raw data that we have in Power BI can be connected to from a pivot table or other connection tool in Excel. So that's a little bit about reporting. And the Power BI models can be refreshed 8 times per day. In a normal Power BI setup, and you can have premium capacity where you can update it, I think it's 48 times per day. So it can be very much close to real time, the data you have inside Power BI. So let's switch then to, we have all of this sales data, the sales volume that we looked at before. And then we're going to do some forecasting and planning. And so far, we more or less looked at Power BI functionality, but now we're going to use this information for planning and forecasting. So in this case, we are looking at the normal Power BI report. We have at the top, now we have a scenario here, which is the planning scenario that we are working with, which is the Q1 2025 forecast. We have gone into a specific segment. We can see here, now I'm the manager for this segment, and I'm going to go in here. We're going to collect information about the sales that we think we will have next year. One way is, for sure, I can then start to edit data. And normally in Power BI, you can never edit any data in Power BI like this. But using the aim plan visual, you can start to really get and collect data from end users very, very fast. So say that you have 50 sales managers across the organization. You need to collect this information from them. You just develop this kind of report once. You have the aim plan visual here. You have normal Power BI charts. And you just go and publish this report to end users. So you just mail this out to end users, and they can start to update data. But we want to use the actual statistics that we have from last year and historical data and other data. What we can do then is to say, okay, I want to pick up last year's sales, but move that 1 year forward. So this is the last year's sales. I can say, okay, I believe we're going to increase this by maybe 12% for the target customer here. Maybe this specific, we're going to sell more of these products, and we're going to run a campaign here in August, like 4,000 units. And again, you cannot do this in normal Power BI, kind of editing numbers this way. Now we're storing this data down to the kind of aim plan SaaS environment, and it's hooked into the Power BI model. And Power BI is recalculating on the fly the revenues. So next step is we can work with prices in the same way, and then all of a sudden, Power BI can bring this together into a P&L forecast. So this is just an example of how the 18.2 million revenues that we just forecasted by SKU and customer now is summarizing, aggregating up into the P&L statement. And we can have other cost and revenues and OPEX and COGS and all of this stuff in the Power BI model. And finally, the last thing I will show is kind of the analytical capabilities of normal Power BI. So all of the data the actuals we have and now the planning data, we can start to compare different scenarios. So I can switch and say, I want to compare our budget for next year with a new forecast scenario, and we can see that the OPEX is a little bit higher and the revenue is increasing a little bit more and so on. And we can aggregate also comments from across the organization. So these are just kind of a few examples of how you can leverage Power BI plus Aim Plan for both reporting and planning. Any questions on that?
We got one question here from Andrew, just kind of asking on the financial statements. Do changes flow dynamically to like balance sheet and cash flow?
Absolutely. So that is true for both kind of the actuals and also for planning. So you have kind of when you're forecasting, for example, the revenues and the costs and so on, that can flow over to the balance sheet and to the cash flow forecast. So that is possible to build into the Power BI model. Absolutely.
Thank you. So, kind of speaking to this for just a minute here, totally enjoyed seeing that. I know you and I have talked about this before, and I've seen some of that. For people who are interested in learning what's out there, what's available in Power BI, Aim Plan is one of those great tools. But I wrote a guide with Khalid Chowdhury, who's an expert in business analytics, started in FP&A, implemented a Power BI solution back in 2017 during the early days. He's implemented a few different ones. We wrote a guide talking about the different options out there. So if you want to learn a little bit more about the space, we even talk about some of those tools that are not Power BI, like one that works with Click and some others that are standalone. So if you want to learn more about what's out there, you can go to my website, thefpnaguide.com, and download that guide. It's right there on the front page. There are some other guides I've done for non-Power BI options as well, as we recognize planning in Power BI isn't for everybody. If you're not using the Microsoft tech stack, it probably doesn't make sense to just implement Power BI. And so, part of that is finding the right solution for you. And there's a lot of different reasons to implement different tools. So let's talk a little bit about that. I want to get your thoughts, Michael. This is a crowded space. I often hear people say one of the hardest things is just knowing where to find the solutions and what's a good solution for them. So what could you offer our audience as they're looking to get more into analytics, planning, and kind of scaling that tech stack beyond spreadsheets? How do they get started? Where do they go?
Yeah, I mean, so honestly, when you're getting out of spreadsheets and reporting into planning, you're almost getting into building an application. Think of it as you've got distributed users inputting data. That data is being analyzed and presented almost immediately in real time. It's a different bar. And so I guess a big one comes down to your skills. How much do you want to learn new skills to be able to do? And can you use your current skills with that tool? Or do you have to go learn a whole new coding language to get going? Different tools have different implications there. That kind of comes back to what you were saying, Paul, on, hey, if you're already in one stack, it makes sense to stay there. I'd say also what else do you have in your stack today? Because there are, if you have a big ERP system in place, there are planning modules that you can go and extend there that are really closely linked into it. So Hyperion within Oracle is a good example. SAP has something called Analytics Cloud you can use. And sometimes just doing something that's in that same ecosystem is fastest and easiest. Or maybe you don't want to spend a lot of time building things and you want something that's more pre-built for you. So there are some kind of point solutions that have a lot of things that you just, you get started and there's a lot of things already there. They're a little bit, maybe less of a, less custom business logic is built into them. They're not you can't just do anything you want. But the flip side of that is maybe they have things already pre-configured, ready to go, and you just need to wire your data into it. So I think it kind of comes down to it comes down to your particular needs, what's easiest for you, what value you're trying to get out of it. And I would always say, what are you trying to achieve from the business standpoint? Are you trying to budget more quickly? Are you trying to do it more accurately? Are you trying to do it at a deeper level than you've ever done before? And then let those needs determine the tooling. it's usually how it's some of the things that go into thinking about it from my end.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to this is how I like to think about it is it starts with your people and process. If you're looking for technology to be your solution, don't implement technology. If you're looking for it to enable you to accomplish more, to be more effective, to answer questions quicker, then that makes sense. But make sure you understand the problem statement and what you're trying to accomplish. And often there isn't a right tool, but the tool that makes sense for you will come out in the process if you do your homework and you really think about it. Usually one will become clear for whatever reason that may be that you feel is the best option for you. Then it's committing to the training and the time it takes. Because many of these tools are going to take some learning. It's not like you can just be on day one and away you go. Often there's implementation. As Michael mentioned, you have everything from point, for small enough companies, you have some almost product led, in an hour you can be up and running, to big, huge companies might send 6 months to a year sometimes. So, Eric, any thoughts on this? I know as founder of Aim Plan and obviously in this quite deep, what's your take?
I think I totally agree that the vendor space is kind of crowded. We estimate that it's between 150 to 200 vendors in the FP&A market space globally. It's kind of local players in each country, and you have different kind of technologies and so on. I think if you're a small company starting out, then you have your accounting system and your spreadsheets more or less, and you're fine with that. And then you start to grow. One thing to consider then, if to invest in a separate FP&A system, is to think about, you have kind of a point in time where you think, okay, either we go into kind of acquiring or start to use a FP&A tool, kind of a web-based tool I would recommend nowadays, kind of maybe what we call the third generation FP&A tools, run in the cloud, easy to use, hooking into the accounting system and so on. And that's many of those are kind of great solutions. That's one alternative. The other alternative, if your organization is building something on top of Power BI or Tableau or Click, that you should look into that market space to think, okay, do we have kind of the infrastructure in place to actually leverage that platform? The advantage of using kind of that analytical platform is that when you integrate data into, say, Power BI or your Fabric environment in the Microsoft environment, you have both your financial data but also your operational data in that data storage. You can kind of get those two types of data working together and not in two separate silo systems where you have your FP&A system and you have your maybe your warehouse in two separate kind of environments. So kind of it's you need to think either kind of a modern web-based tool or something built for your data analytics platform. And also look for new tools, kind of maximum 10 years old, because there is a lot of old systems from the 90s, kind of 20 years with old technologies. So you don't get lost in those kind of systems.
Thank you for that. And I agree with you. It is somewhere 150 plus. I have a spreadsheet with probably about 150 tools on it right now. And I know I'm missing some. So not surprised to hear you say that. It's a huge market. There's something out there that's going to meet your needs. It's just being thoughtful in that. And, obviously any of us here on this call can help you in different ways. We see some questions in the chat. We'll get to a few of those shortly. But moving on past this section, I want to talk a little bit just transforming FP&A, how leading finance teams are doing that. Because what I've heard really interesting from a number of CFOs is you can tell a modern CFO by who owns data. And what they mean by that is not that finance has to own data, but they're intimately involved. I heard one person even go, in the future, the CFO will be kind of the chief business intelligence officer, because so much of data flows through finance, operational and others. We're kind of neutral observer in that we don't have a certain way we want to see it like many departments do, and we can help facilitate that across the company. So what are you seeing? What are some insights or things you're seeing that companies are doing to really transform and get to that advanced analytics? Maybe, Michael, any thoughts there?
Yeah. So I think, one example, it's good. I like how you mentioned who owns the data, because I think if you're doing planning, budgeting, or forecasting, the more you're taking operational KPIs and data that sits outside your ledger, and then using that to do live analytics as plans are happening, or pulling in benchmark data from other sources, so that you're giving feedback to people as they're creating a budget or a plan, whether it's suggested values that go into it, or it's almost like live critiques of the budget that someone's building as they're doing it. That's an example of how finance can use extra data sources beyond the typical, just like, 3 financial statements and the underlying data that they own, to enrich the planning process. I think another one is getting more and more into like statistical forecasts and suggested values, and building things out that run in parallel to what teams are doing. I always recommend people need to own their forecasts and plans and budgets, because at the end of the day, people are responsible for those. So I don't like going hands off, but I do like, I've seen some FP&A teams that are building their own statistical models that they're using to provide as they're critiquing or interacting with functions that are providing inputs to them. So a sales team will say, here's my revenue forecast. The FP&A team will say, our own projections we built are different, and let's talk about where that's different. And so you can more easily have a perspective that you bring to other business partners by taking advantage of those analytics. So there's a couple examples of what I've seen companies doing lately.
I think one of the big ones you hit on right there is the ability for FP&A, the CFO, to pressure test and challenge that sales forecast and say, is this accurate? To have the analytics to do that. I can remember, one company, when I was there, at first we really had no ability. They just give us numbers. And over time, as I started to learn the business, I started to build stuff to say, okay, based on prior years and what I know and what we're seeing, here's where I think we're going to end. Tell me why your number's so different. And we could go through and have those intelligent conversations. And they're so important. So I think that's a huge one. CFOs really want to be able to pressure test and not challenge in the sense of, hey, prove you wrong, but make sure they're comfortable with the numbers sales giving them. Because I bet if I asked, if everybody could raise their hand, but you can't, if I asked you, how many of you ever had that over-optimistic salesperson where you get the number and you're just like, yeah, that ain't happening, right? And so you want to be able to explain why and get into those details. So we've talked a little bit of what you've seen in transforming. Are you seeing new roles? How are you seeing finance teams changing? And we talked a little bit about the CFO, but maybe in FP&A, have you seen new roles come up, Michael?
I think you definitely are seeing there's 2 varieties of these things. You might actually hire a technical first, finance second skill set into the finance team that's sitting as a part of the finance function. Some companies do that, like function by function, they're adding in analytics people. So think of it as like maybe a BI engineer is hired that sits dedicated to the finance team. Other teams are centralizing those and kind of creating like centers of excellences with those analytics resources that are then shared. But I've seen both happening. The other one I'd say is there's a lot of retraining happening. So your company, a lot of companies are providing people with new training and should be doing this. And if you're, ask your company and push for this. But I think anyone needs to be doing a lot of retraining at the moment. And then another role that I see is product manager style roles. So if you think of like the budget as a product itself, taking someone who has a product manager first skill set, which is doing user research and looking at satisfaction rates and effectiveness of it as a product perspective, product manager roles I've seen even coming up. And you can have a product manager that owns a process or that owns even data sets. So you can have data product owners that exist as well. If you're really getting into a higher scale, you have to be a pretty big company before you're going to have a lot of data product owners. But I think all those roles are coming out and becoming more common.
And I'll share one, and then we'll move toward wrap up. I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I joined a company where my title was Director of FP&A, Sales Operations and Analytics. I didn't have a single person who reported to me. And I was focusing on coordinating between all of them and trying to help us get our data in a way that we could switch our business model to a subscription model. So I was basically a coordinator, communicator was my role. And I reported to the VP of FP&A. I didn't even build budgets. So that was a very unique FP&A role. But we're seeing more and more of those type of things because FP&A is one of the only groups in the entire business that has a 360 view of the business. And that's really invaluable. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. I want to give everybody a challenge, and then I'm going to give Michael and Eric a little bit of an opportunity to share if you want to learn more or get in touch with them, how you can do that, and we'll move to questions. So I'd love for you to put in the chat, what's one thing you could start doing to improve your analytics today? Something we mentioned, whether it's testing Power BI, starting to use Power Query, getting your reports and your data in a cleaner shape. There's something you can do today. Would love for you to share that in the public chat. What's one thing you can take away? Because our view is we're here to share our thoughts, but if you just listen for an hour, go back to your desk, go, that was nice, and never do anything, then you missed an opportunity to improve. That's really the goal here in these webinars, is we want you to be able to take something away that you can use. And then I'll turn it back to Eric to share a slide here. If you want to get in touch with Eric or Michael, how you can do that. All right, so you can see there on the screen, if you're in North America, Michael, you can see the QR code. You can see for Eric, Europe, and APAC, they'd be happy to meet with you one-on-one to discuss your specific questions or situation, take follow-up calls. So really take advantage of it. These are two global experts. They know what they're talking about, and they'll spend some time with you and help you with your business and give you some advice and what's the right direction for you to take, because it's different for everybody. All right, so we'll go ahead and jump into Q&A. First one is a simple one I saw here. Mahmoud asked about taking training for AimPlan. I assume if you sign up, that's offered to all your customers, right, Eric?
Absolutely. We have a kind of a webinar style self-learning training set that you use, but we assume that you first know Power BI because it's kind of based on Power BI, so that's kind of an entry-level knowledge that you need to have.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we mention in our Power BI guide is, look, if you don't have the skill set or not willing to develop it, then you don't want to look at Power BI as your solution. You need a certain level of understanding for any Power BI-based solution, and that's true for AimPlan. It doesn't mean you need to be an expert, but you do need to understand the basics.
I'd add too, like if you're looking for, live training with the person on the phone or with you, that's where you can go to an AimPlan partner. That's 480th or other partners in the network would also be able to do that sort of thing with you.
Right, so there you go, if you need that type of training. Another question that came up is, can AimPlan do consolidation?
So the question is actually, can Power BI do consolidation? Can you extract data from your accounting system, kind of eliminate the internal intercompany transactions and all of these rules that you have in the consolidation solution? And the answer is yes. For sure, if you're going to do kind of super complex things where you need a tool like Hyperion or these kind of enterprise-ish tools, then you should go for that kind of consolidation solution. But if you're talking about mid-sized business and small enterprise business, you can kind of build those kind of models into your Power BI model.
Great. And I'm just going to run through what a few people said they're going to do to commit, and then we'll come back to questions, because I really like some of these answers. Apply Power BI after this session. Learn a bit of Python to make sales forecasts. Keep learning. FP&A is a developing field. Always ensure that data can be verified. Yes. Trust but verify. Combine data from different sources to extract insights. We'll have a lot of good commitments. One said start thinking about some use cases for AimPlan within the organization. Really likes the tool. So thanks for that, Philippe. And we have others in here. Apply Power BI ASAP. Need to understand data engineering. So a lot of great comments. Really enjoyed what you're able to do there. Thank you for sharing those. We'll head back over to Q&A and just a couple more we have here. All right, so I want to cover one up here around the tool, and then we have a couple general questions. So how are the intersections with original forecast and write back table determined? Is that determined on setup? So like top level entered with logic to push down to lower levels, or enter at the lowest level and aggregate up? So Eric, I'll throw that one to you.
Very technical, specific question for sure. First of all, the AimPlan solution is based on your existing semantic model that you have in Power BI with your dimension tables and your actual tables, kind of that data model you have. So you don't need to remodel that into some new FP&A tool or anything like that. So that's if you have, we normally say that if you have built a Power BI model, you're kind of 75-80% ready to kind of build your planning model on top of that one. When AimPlan is writing back or storing the planning data, it's much more than write back. It's audit trail and a lot of other stuff. We are storing the data connected to your original dimension. So if you have your chart of account, you have your projects, you have your cost center dimensions and such, we are storing it on the ID keys of those kind of intersections that you have in your Power BI model. But we can take 30 minutes call to discuss this for sure.
Yeah, exactly. That's the quick answer. It could be a much longer discussion on that. So please reach out to Eric on that. I'm sure he'd be happy to, dive into that further. So one person asked, and this is more kind of, we have a couple more general questions around FP&A. One is, what is the top 3 skills that FP&A managers should have? Everybody's going to have a different list. I actually, in my podcast, FP&A Tomorrow, I ask every guest, what's the top technical skill? What's the top soft skills should people have? After the top of the list for technical, usually it's financial modeling and some kind of spreadsheet skills. Often analytics is mentioned, critical thinking. I've had simplify, but the most common tend to be Excel or spreadsheets and financial modeling. That's probably where you need to start, and it advances from there. On the soft skills side, some form of communication almost always comes up, whether it be being good at data storytelling, business partnering. I've had empathy come up multiple times, active listening. So I think, on the technical side, you need to be analytical. You need to be able to build models. You need to be able to use spreadsheets and other tools. On that soft skills side, it really is about managing relationships, being able to communicate with people and help share that information by telling the story, helping influence the business. Eric or Michael, anything you'd add to that?
On the soft skills side, I mean, the ability to influence change within your company is pretty important. Like this can be like on a business decision that you're actually participating in, but it might also be like a decision on data or a decision on, there's all sorts of things. So just influencing others is a big one. And I will share this. At McKinsey, they have a model called the influence model that basically says there's 4 main ways that you can influence other people. I'm going to put that in the chat too if people want to go and read about that and what they recommend.
All right, great. So we just have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Gilbert asked, hey, do I have a list published of the 150 software? I don't at the moment. Send me an email, Gilbert. I'll see what I can send you on that. What are the main qualities of a best-in-class FP&A team? Curiosity is near the top, making a difference for the business. If you want to assess how you're performing, AFP has an assessment model. FP&A Trends has one you can take. I think FP&A Club has one. There's several out there. I even developed one recently. I haven't released it publicly, but it's always good to look at some of those different models because that'll give an idea of where you're at and where you need to go. People have spent hours on those. So I would refer you to go there. FP&A Trends, AFP, FP&A Club, all of those could help with that. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap here. I believe we've covered just about all the questions that we've had. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to have all of you on the webinar. Feel free to connect with any of us, with Eric, Michael, myself on LinkedIn, and also schedule a meeting with them. They can help you with your business and figure out where you're going. AimPlan's a great tool. It's, if you're on Power BI and you fit their kind of customer match, talk to them, check it out, see if it makes sense for you. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Michael and Eric, for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you, Paul and Michael. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Eric.